for participating in this session on smart agriculture and food security in Africa. We're going to have a wonderful opening with some opening remarks by Mr. Ambroise Fayolle, Vice President for the European Investment Bank. He's going to frame our discussion. Then we're going to hear from Governor Mohammed. He is governor of Marsabit County in Kenya. And then we're going to have a live panel discussion with 3 panelists here in the room and 2 online. So a wonderful setting, I think, for this discussion. So first of all, Ambroise Fayolle, Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Could I invite you to frame the discussion we're going to have today?
Thank you so much, Stientje, and welcome to all for this EIB WAI joint event on smart agriculture and food security. I'm going to be brief because it has been a long day, and but the issue is very important. So it is true that the agricultural sector is contributing to climate change in many parts of the world with significant emissions and environmental footprints due to overexploitation and continuous expansion of agricultural land that responds to complex trends. So what we hope is that agriculture is not going to be only part of the biodiversity and climate crisis, that they are going to become part of the solution. And actually, it's clear that investments into sustainable, more resilient food production, harvesting, storage, distribution, etc., can significantly contribute to mitigation of climate change and biodiversity loss, and still promote security of food supply and resilience. What we can do is, I think, 2 things in joining forces, actually. One is joining forces of financial institutions, in particular MDBs. The role of MDBs, the role of public banks, actually, in general, is to support public and private sector operators in this sector. And actually, this is what we see. We see more and more lending to bioeconomy sector in multilateral development banks, and this is also true for EIB. And it's also true for EIB outside of the European Union. And what we focus on is an increase into accessing long-term financing, liquidity by SMEs, smallholders and farmers to invest in their farms, to support investments in downstream food food value chain production, to provide finance to public and the private entities enabling infrastructure such as irrigation, rural roads, rural electrification, etc. But beyond the financing, what we need also to join forces is to join forces with all the specialist partners that actually we are privileged to have here on this panel. Clearly, institutions like IFAD, like the World Food Programme, like the International Red Cross, like the Africa Food Security Fund, and of course WAI. So we are very pleased to, and I think we can learn a lot from the contributions from these panels. I'm going to give the floor to Governor Mohammed, who is governor of Marsabit County in Kenya, who has kindly agreed to address this panel with a keynote speech on especially dealing with how local populations are going to cope with and adapt to the impact of climate change. And I thank you very much, Stientje. I thank you very much also for the quality of the cooperation that we have with WAI. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fayolle, Ambroise. And indeed, the worst thing as a moderator can do is not even introduce herself. So my name is Stientje Van Veldhoven. I'm a Vice President with the World Resources Institute. And indeed, we have a long-standing and very fruitful cooperation also with the EIB of many of the topics. And thank you so much for highlighting how agriculture should and must and will become, I would say, part of the solution and not the problem. The need to join forces will benefit all, but it also requires that all join forces to actually enable all those elements in the chain to contribute. Now, I would very much like to invite, indeed, Governor Mohammed Ali to give his perspectives. Tell us about what the challenges are that you are facing and also what the kind of solutions are that you are looking for and what you need to actually implement those solutions. The floor is yours. I'll give you this microphone. May help you in the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, my name is Mohammed Ali. You correctly said Governor Marsabit County. But I wear another hat, and I don't want to be back home accused to be representing only one sector. I am also the chairman for 10 other counties, what we call back home Frontier Counties Development Council. These are counties in northern part of the country and a few others which share similar climatic conditions. Having said that, I appreciate your question, being the challenges we are facing in Africa, specifically in Kenya, and so to speak, northern Kenya. I want to say that effects, rather negative effects of climatic changes is most severe in that part of the globe. People rely on rail-fed agriculture for their, farming, for livestock keeping. We are pastoralists in nature. And this is the 5th rainy season that has failed in a row. This has got devastating effects because livestock have perished in millions. People who rely on this livestock have nothing to turn to. Children have dropped out of school. Water sources have dried up. So it's really crazy. Things are real bad. The situation is very severe. You might have seen, only last week on Saturday, our president was leading the nation in distributing food relief to affected people in that region. So problem of water, problem of food, all this kind of thing. If you ask me what the solution is, solutions are there. And I want to say, with all those problems, we are not asking for, that direct support. We are asking for partnership. And with true partnership and well thought out programs, we can overcome. How? There are numerous investment opportunities they are in, so that people so affected can leverage from those investments. For example, in my own county, Marsabit, we have the best wind in Africa. And you may know Lake Turkana wind power, which is the best in Africa, is from my county. Sorry? Yeah, very good. Good to know that. And therefore, what am I saying? There are opportunities to invest in, similar investment in the county. There are many other areas investments have been done, and it's viable. Investors can come and partner with us in this green energy. When you talk of solar energy, 11 months, in 12 months, we only miss out 1 month collectively. A wonderful opportunity, in solar power investment. We have, so many animals, livestock for that matter, which because of this severe drought keep perishing. But if we invest in, for example, value addition programs, say for example we put up a tannery there, leather factory, this will enable, the livestock keepers to be able to take advantage of that facility. Lake Turkana itself, although the name sounds like it's in Turkana County, 80% of that water is in Marsabit County. Even in Turkana County, the other side, we have 800 kilometers of beach unexploited. Investors are invited. They can freely come there. We are in charge of the policy programs. I am the head of the county, the environment will be so friendly, right? Our president is encouraging investors to come to that part of the country. There's a lot of fish in that lake, for example, enough to feed both counties and other parts of the country. This is another area we can partner. This is another area I am inviting our friends who are able, who can come and invest. And other ecosystem conservation, we have Marsabit Forest, we have Mount Kulal Forest. These are areas, I think, when we invest in well thought out programs, we will be able to overcome these challenges. I want to stop there for now.
Thank you so much for these very personal insights. And it's heartbreaking the way you describe it. It must feel even more heartbreaking to have this food distribution in your own country, to see all these people lose their livelihoods, to see year after year their hopes diminishing. So thank you for sharing that with us and for also outlining how you see that these people that lose their current livelihood could be finding other livelihoods. The question that I would have for you, since let's say renewable energies are of course very different sectors from the sectors that they currently live in, how do you connect with the local communities to make sure that these investments also benefit them and create new livelihoods for those people that are so affected by the drought? And when you talk indeed about forest management programs, how can we make sure that this also creates really those livelihoods for those people that are currently so affected by the drought and that need other ways to create an income so that they can send their children to school, that they can have food on the table? Would you be able to comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. For the sake of the local communities, we have other interventions by the county government of Marsabit and other counties, doing, for example, medium dams where we train people to do some irrigation on a small scale. Unfortunately, the capacity to expand and do larger investments is not there. But once these proposals I'm talking about is undertaken, a percentage of the revenue normally goes to the local communities. Yeah? So we undertake construction of public facilities and utilities and ensure that the local community where projects are undertaken are not left behind. And once these investments are done, there will be job creation, and of course this is a direct benefit to the local community as well. So opportunities will be there once these investments become realized.
And it's so important how you touch upon the scalability of some of these solutions and also what is needed to build the capacity amongst the population. So could you elaborate a little bit on external support that there may have been that you found successful or you would like to have more to enable that capacity building, to enable people to find those new livelihoods and to spread those well-functioning, let's say, alternatives to keeping their current livelihoods through different mechanisms? So maybe it's more technical expertise, maybe it's different forms of capacity building. Could you elaborate a bit more on what's needed in that regard?
Thank you very much. As a matter of fact, we have a number of partners who have been working with us through the journey, and we are indeed very grateful to them. We have European Union who has been supporting us in peace initiatives. We have been supporting us in providing some cold storage for the people around the lake, those who do farming, and some training, workshop programs to, capacity building of the county government itself. We have World Bank with a number of programs, climate smart agriculture, though and a few other partners. Unfortunately, this support very small. While we appreciate what they have been able to do this far, but the magnitude of the problem now is much bigger than the intervention that we are experiencing. So those are the kind of external supports that we've been receiving, and we really appreciate.
Thank you so much. And I think the 5 years in a row have more than 5 times amplified your need for support. And so I clearly hear you say there has been very successful examples, but we urgently, more urgently than ever, need to scale up those examples, need to scale that assistance so that all of these communities can build the capacities to help them build those new livelihoods. And I'm sure that the panel has heard you loud and clear. So let's also make sure that we turn to them and that we also ask them to reflect on the kind of situations that you are encountering in your countries and all the other countries that you are responsible for. And I'd love to give you the floor for some last remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this whole idea of the conference is very important. Information dissemination has been at the peak, very important. People are now informed. But what I want to encourage the players in this sector, we must move with the speed out there and implement what we talk about. Without implementation, the situation may get out of hand. Today, as we speak, as we are seated here, we have had lunch, all of us. There are people who don't have lunch. There are people tonight who will not have dinner. They will sleep hungry. There are many children who are not going to go to school, not because they choose not to, but because they are not able. They sleep hungry, not because they don't have appetite, but they have no opportunity. There's no food. So the situation is that serious. You know, when you 100% rely on nature, so to speak, we rely on rainfall for that matter. And I have said it has failed 5 seasons in a row. It's really, really serious and severe. And therefore, we must be, less of talking in the boardrooms. We must be action-oriented. We must go out there and save lives and implement the programs that we have pledged.
And I think in that last sentence, you basically linked agricultural policies to saving of lives, because that's what it is, and that's what it's going to do. But you need the support to be able to roll out these adaptation measures that will bring your agricultural practices and your communities in line with the new reality of a 1.2 degree world where we already are. But we have to make sure that this situation, those children going to bed hungry, are not exacerbated because we go to an even further increase of warming, of global warming. And that link between global warming, the effect on agriculture, and those people that rely on nature for their food, for their livelihoods. I think I haven't heard it expressed more directly as you have, Governor, so thank you so much for that. And may it be an inspiration for all of us to be even more innovative and impactful in the way that we turn those commitments into action, which is all of our responsibility, us who can depend on the supermarket and don't need to depend on rain to actually give us food, which is a situation for many people worldwide. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your remarks. A big round of applause, please, for the Governor. And I think that also brings us to our panel. I think, unless Ambroise, would you like to make a few remarks in the middle before I go to the panel now, just to make sure?
I have just one practical thing to say. When it is red, it means that it doesn't work.
Well, that may have been the most useful comment in terms of making this panel into a success, so thank you so much for that. You see, experience brings us a long way, so excellent. So let me go and welcome all of our panel members, both those here in the room and also online. We have Felipe Ortega. He is head of bioeconomy at the European Investment Bank, so pleased to have you. We have Dr. Martin Frick, director of the World Food Programme Global Office in Germany. And we have Katie Meighan, General Counsel and Associate Vice President Finance at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And online, we have Adam Bornstein, lead for Innovative Finance and System Change at the Danish Red Cross. And I think we were meant to also have Dennis, but he may join us a little bit later. So let's make sure that we start with who we have here. And thank you all so much for joining today. I thought I might go and sit there, but here I can actually see you better. So I think I'm going to stay in this seat. And like I've said to the panelists, but also Governor Bayer, please do. If you at any point would like to comment on something that one of the other speakers has said, please signal it to me, and I'll try to make this a bit of an interactive session, and want to make sure that we make it as valuable discussion for all of us as possible. So, Felipe, could I turn to you first. Is there any way, we're talking about short-term challenges linked very much to long-term challenges. And so while we need to address the short-term challenges, the children going to bed hungry, we also need to make sure that we make those investments to make sure that in the long term these solutions are really there to solve their problems structurally. So what would be your advice on trying to reconnect also to that longer term, those longer term challenges, and making sure that we solve these issues structurally and not have to solve them through food aid, for example? Your comments, please.
Do you hear me? Hello? Yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Better now? Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for this question. Of course, I mean, the short term we have heard, there are people that cannot, that have nothing to eat, that have to take out their children from school. So this is an emergency that needs to be addressed with emergency measures. We need to make sure that these emergency measures do not compromise, and we have seen this in many countries, do not compromise then the food production capacities and food production knowledge in the long term. So that would be the first thing. Then it is also very important to note that it is important to note that these
Trying to be helpful can sometimes be disruptive, right? So sorry about that. Please continue.
So short term versus long term. The thing is that it's in human nature that normally the short term is an emergency. Now with the high food prices, everybody is talking about food security. A year ago, nobody was talking about food security, and the food security issues, as we have heard, in many parts of the world were already there. So it is important to understand the opportunity cost of emergency and try to establish strategies that are more long-term and more devised more in the long term and in a remaining way, so that the next crisis is solved already in the long-term frame. And so how do we do this? Of course, and there are measures that can be even issued today. Of course, if people have a harvest failure, they don't have money to repay any loans. They don't have money to even buy the next season's seeds or the next season's fertilizers. So there is an important aspect of liquidity availability to the farming communities in the short term, which in these situations, of course, there need also be public support to compensate this. In the long term, we can provide credit lines with more or less public support in hybrid instruments to help the farmers to get access to liquidity to buy these inputs, but also to do the long-term investments they need to prevent the next crisis. No? The other aspect where we need also to have long-term measures is in infrastructure development that addresses this hydrologic need or the flood prevention aspects, but also very importantly to give access to these communities to the markets to sell their products, to make money, decent money out of their work and their living, which is what I think most of the people want. So for this, of course, it is very important that the countries as owners of this think about strategy, programming and implementation. And there's, I think, where we as multilateral finance institutions can also have a key element beside providing the necessary finance, together with other donors that provide more the subsidy money for this hybrid for this short-term solutions, but also to do this financial instruments and this hybrid products. It is important that there is this capacity building at the level of TA, which needs forcefully to be strategic. So the key word here is think about the opportunity cost of crisis and try to do investment now to prevent the next crisis. This is, I think, what is important.
Yes, thank you so much. Because of course, indeed, just ensuring the liquidity in the same livelihood while there's year after year after year of drought means that is not enough. So thank you so much for also highlighting the need to ensure that we invest in adaptation that will ensure better circumstances for those livelihoods, but also the strengthening and the capacity building. So I think all of those strategies are needed. They will of course require a lot of finance also to do all of this. And we'll get back to that on how to finance some of these measures, because I think everybody knows how to finance a solar panel because there's a very clear business case. And even though there's a very clear business case, investments in Africa in renewable energies even went down over the past year. So while we know that all these investment needs are there, it's still not being done. And it's even more complicated, of course, for adaptation measures, for infrastructural measures. So I'm going to come back with you one question on how do we overcome also that hurdle. But first, let me see if Dennis is online to ask him about the finance perspective. But if he's not, we'll get back to that in a minute. I will turn to Katie then, because if we see all of these needs, they are large, they are urgent, they are both short-term and long-term. What role for the international community to play in all of these challenges that the governor has laid out? And also mostly those longer-term challenges. How do we improve the situations for these people on a structural basis? And could I invite all the speakers to really hold the microphone continuously close to their mouth, because otherwise, with the noise around, it's quite a challenge for our audience to hear you. So please, Katie. It's not working yet. I think you have to push the button. If it's red, it doesn't work. So push the broad button, yeah. Oh, now it's on. Now it's on.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes,
there
works.
we go. I would say that the current state of food insecurity in the world is of proportions we have not seen in our lifetimes. The recent State of Food Insecurity in the World report, which is done jointly with FAO, WFP, IFAD, UNICEF, WHO, and others, is really sounding the alarm bell. And we are seeing in figures the tragic reality that His Excellency, the Governor, Muhammad Ali, told us about in stories of what is going on, not just in Kenya, but across the world. We come together today in Egypt at COP on the African continent, which today has about 50% of the inhabitants who are food insecure. That's a shocking figure when you look across the continent. And yet Africa as a continent can be the breadbasket of the world. Of all the unused arable land in the world, 80% is within Africa. Africa has a very vibrant young workforce. Africa can feed itself and even feed others in the world. So I'm with IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which is laser focused on supporting smallholder farmers across the world. We invest in about 100 countries, and we support people who are in rural communities really in the last mile. So generally small farmers who are at or right above the poverty level. And after a few years with our projects, they often can double their income. And we work putting people and communities at the center of projects. So I do think this is a challenge for the international community, and it's a challenge for each one of us. And as Vice President Fayolle said in his introductory remarks, it's integral for us to work together to attack these solutions. I think that it was very interesting, you know, what you said about water and irrigation. It's a critical problem. It's probably the problem that's running through almost all of the discussions at COP in one way or another. And so I was reflecting on the theme of the panel, smart agriculture. And you know, it's like you said, Your Excellency, it's nothing new. The solutions are there. We have to enact them and we have to take action. And I learned something today. I learned many things today, but one thing I learned today was that the first ministry ever created in the world, do you know where it was created, the first government ministry? It was created in our host country, in Egypt. And do you know what was the name of that ministry? This was 3000 BC in the time of the pharaohs, okay? It was the Ministry of Irrigation, so that they could use Nile water to irrigate the land in Egypt. So these solutions are there. They were there, many of them, since the time of the pharaohs. We need to implement these solutions. I'm really happy that today IFAD and the IFC launched a handbook on smart irrigation solutions, which we hope can also provide a policy platform for governments looking at irrigation, as well as practical lessons learned for smallholder farmers who really are at the center of changing irrigation. On the continent of Africa, only 7% of the land is irrigated, compared to 56% in Southeast Asia. The solutions are there, and like the governor said, we need to act together, jointly, to implement them.
Thank you so much, and it's such a telling example indeed, the difference in irrigation. And we all know that without water there's no life, and without those plants there's no opportunities for agriculture to flourish, and agriculture is the basis for every economy to start growing. So I'm very happy to see that Dennis Matangira, CEO of the African Food Security Fund, has been able to join us. A warm welcome. We have started on this panel outlining both the challenges, the heartbreaking short-term challenges, but also the incredible longer-term challenges, or should I say the structural challenges, because they're here now, they're here tomorrow, and they will still be here in 5 years if we don't solve them. So I'd say the structural challenges. And we talked about what is needed to address those, but also about the financing needs that are needed to actually implement all of these, for example, irrigation projects. So, Mr. Matangira, could I ask you to reflect on that? How do we get the financing for all of those projects realized? What's the magnitude of the investments needed? And what are the type of companies that are actually investing in resilience along the food value chain? And what are some of the challenges that they face? Thank you so much for your inbreng. The sound is off at the moment. Perhaps, I don't know if it's your side. We'd love to hear from you, so you could try again. No, there's still no sound. We don't hear you from our side, and our technical team seems to indicate that there's perhaps something on your side. Let us try it again. No. We cannot hear you. Might I suggest that we ask the technical team to see if they can relate to you via chat? Or does it work now? You're now large on the screen. We're still not hearing you. I would suggest that the technical team tries to contact you to see if we can get you on screen again to answer this question. And in the meantime, we will continue here with the panel, and we will be very happy to come back to you and make sure that we get your remarks. Thank you so much. So then, Adam, given your work with the Danish Red Cross, let's hope that it works with you. Let's see. Otherwise, we go back to the room here. How might we accelerate that shift to a more secure and more resilient food system on the agricultural continent? What's the perspective from the Red Cross? I'd love to hear from you.
Great. Well, Thank you very much. I appreciate for being here. I love this question. It's very optimistic. It acknowledges that we identified solutions, and I think this is what the Honorable Governor mentioned during his keynote, and also what Katie had mentioned before, is that there are solutions for secure and resilient food systems. But perhaps the transition is going too slowly, or perhaps not at all. And therefore, I think in order to kind of like address the question as to how do we accelerate the solutions, or how do we accelerate this push towards resilience, we have to kind of understand why is the pace being impacted. And there are probably three buckets that we could put this in. And I would say first, disasters and conflicts are increasingly more frequent and they're protracted. And as a result, it puts more strains on resources, the human capital, as well as financial and food. It sparks a slew of secondary and cascading perils that have magnified in complexity. And then there's also this heightened gender disparities, where women who are more vulnerable because of food insecurity really carry the blunt of that. So a second reason for perhaps a slow transition is that the traditional humanitarian response approach has really been more of a reactive rather than proactive, and we focus on saving lives as opposed to rural development. And so to this end, we probably have to rethink the approach, have somewhat of a mindset change, if you will. Think of a policy shift, which I think we've heard today. Humanitarian organizations can focus on unlocking funding that go to communities and governments to build capacity and support ongoing operations, rather than just dealing with sort of the crisis at the moment. So we're talking about supplying support for operating CapEx. And then there's a third reason, I think, that the pace has slowed slightly, is that there really needs to be a lot of focus, or more focus, on strengthening in-country food production, i.e. food self-sufficiency. And then related to this, an emphasis on developing social safety nets. And this is more government-backed than donor-backed. As my colleague Krister pointed out to me the other day, this last point about in-country food production is really core to accelerating more resilient systems, because it really puts the control back into the hands of the local communities in the countries. And so what is the ways that that control has been taken away are really from the macroeconomic environment, if you will. So food import prices are very dependent on the interchange between local currency and US dollar and euro. Food imports are dependent on logistics, supply chains, and fuel prices. And food import prices and imports are really dependent on politics of other countries, as well as the acceptance of exports. So I think on Friday, the UN has their noon briefing, and it was shared that in Mozambique, the WFP has sent out a warning that they're going to have to suspend assistance to 1 million people. And this is during the peak hunger season is coming up in February. They need $51 million. And this money is also there to support the humanitarian air service. So Mozambique, relying on an international organization, is now going to have some issues supporting and feeding their communities because of this lack of financing, and also a dependency on third parties. So how do we accelerate this process towards self-sufficiency? And what are the international organizations going to do to support this? And it comes down to supporting the local agriculture with financing and development, which is what we've heard. And so there's a couple of buckets that I think we can focus on. One is improving the gender equality, and this is through education and engagement. Another is improved ag techniques, transitioning to more climate resilient agriculture, for example, drought resistant rice. Improved irrigation and fertilizer, for example, thinking about biochar and rainforest harvesting, getting away from petroleum-based fertilizers, and a gradual process for more local-based product. Improve logistics supply chains, for example, using blockchain and zero knowledge proofs to enhance identification, which are projects that the Red Cross are looking at. And I would say improved storage capacity is super important, thinking about solar powered cold storage, which different organizations are testing in Uganda and Nigeria. And then also strengthening direct links to smallholder farmers in the market space, giving them more transparency and more control over the price of goods that are being sold. And then finally, I would say trying to address land right issues. That's actually critical to this to the bigger picture. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you very much for this very comprehensive answer that also links some of the answers given before by the previous speakers. So the situation is getting more severe. We see droughts experiencing more often. There's a need for techniques, but there's also a need to reform a market. Actually, something which was also highlighted by one of the previous speakers. And all of that will make the food situation more resilient, because now the food situation is actually not only dependent on the weather, but also dependent on the political climate surrounding it. And I think that combination of, let's say, that this security also really depends on the, let's say, international political climate, be it monetary or be it political, is something which is not often associated with the need to make sure that there's more in-country production to increase that safety. You also mentioned agricultural techniques, and very much like to hear from Martin. The World Food Programme works in many contexts around the world. And what have you seen as the role of climate-smart technologies and practices in overcoming these problems? Could you elaborate, please?
So, is this
Push the button.
now it works? One, okay.
It's counterintuitive, I have to say, yes. But
It's really strange. Anyway, well, thank you for being here, and much has already been said, and I feel with the governor, because we are currently concerned about 22 million people in the Horn of Africa being acutely food insecure. I think what we are seeing is not only the climate crisis, and please take that in inverted commas, but we are also seeing an enormous soil crisis, a water crisis. And what I find encouraging is that at this COP I see more and more understanding of the interdependency of these issues. And in different contexts, at the Munich Security Conference, for example, when we speak about hard security situations, when we speak about terrorism, for example, the line goes all the way back to life and livelihoods, because people don't join terrorist organizations because they think they are fantastic. They join it because they don't have a choice. So what we see is we are having a whole initiative around the Sahel where we are rebuilding resilience, where with very simple techniques we are working with farming ladies, building half moons in which water is being retained when it rains. They are filled with a hole with dung and straw where you can put in a tree, and that tree is the beginning of a virtuous circle that really helps bring the ecosystem back. First you have shade, then the temperature of the soil goes down 4 to 6 degrees. Then simple agriculture is possible, and then you have a whole range of possibilities to increase soil organic matter. You can go on composting, you can use biochar, you can and you should use in an intelligent way animals, which is something I'm saying explicitly, because in a Western dominated discussion it sometimes seems like animals are all the problems in the world. Well, it depends where it is, you know. We now have some areas where the farmers would actually give little gifts to the herders to stay just a little bit longer with the cattle, so they fertilize. So it's all about building up nature capital. It's bringing carbon down from the atmosphere into the soil, which makes it not only a local solution, but also a global climate solution, and most importantly, a water solution. Water is not an engineering problem. It's not dams and rivers and, you know, canals and all of that. Water is in soils. 1 kilogram of humus can hold 20 liters of water. So what we need to do, and of course, do not misunderstand me, in the short term, people need food now, and Governor, I'm entirely with you, and you know, we are running to our donors and say, please, we need that money right now. But we cannot go back and save the same people every single year. So in the medium and long term, we have to invest in intelligent systems, in agroforestry, in silvopastoralism, in building up humus and really helping people to come up from the ground. And there is a combination here, that's my last sentence, which I think is interesting because it's very much low-key traditional methods. It's a variety of crops that have been neglected, but it's also latest digital technology to spread the knowledge, to give farming ladies the possibility to understand the markets, to know how they can distribute. And if this comes together, we get a really powerful solution that works on a whole bandwidth of problems.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think looking at that entire avoidance of food loss and waste actually is an incredibly important part of the solution, and it can sometimes mean it can also go hand in hand with better and different revenue streams also for the farmers. And so if we avoid that food loss and waste, and if we then make sure that we use and don't underutilize also the residual streams from the agricultural production, there is lots to do. And I think I really loved how you outlined how restoring nature in itself is actually a solution to many of the problems that we are discussing. Because restoring nature in itself will help restore the water cycle, which is the basis for all life and agricultural practices, as we said it. And how, actually also going back, we talked about Egypt, right? But many of the long-standing agricultural practices that people have had for a long time can actually solve the problems and are also fit to that situation in that locality. Because there's no one size fits all. Every region will have different practices that fit the agricultural practices. So we need to restore also those traditional practices as part of restoring this balance, basically. So thank you so much for that. And we're going to try to turn back to Dennis now to start up our finance perspective, because we have outlined the challenge. I think we have outlined the fact that the solutions are there, both technical solutions, but also, let's say, I would say governance solutions in terms of changing markets, changing those kind of interventions. But all of it will take a magnitude of investments. And Dennis, I'd love to hear from you. What is the scale of investments that we're talking about? What is needed? What are the types of companies that are investing in resilience along the food value chain? And what challenges do they face? Let's try. I hope to hear from you.
Can everybody hear me now?
Yes, very good.
Okay. No, I think from a funding side, the dichotomy we seem to have within the food value chain is that the return hurdles that are required are not always consistent with what smallholders and medium farmers can do within their own universe. So we have been having this discussion. We are now in our second fund. Our first fund was the Africa Agricultural Fund. Now we are in the Africa Food Security Fund. We have been in constant discussions with the AFDB, African Bank, and all the other Pan-African banks on the issue of first loss provisions, because the local banks are just not set up to support smallholder farmers and medium enterprise farmers. They all like to look at balance sheet lending, so they all like to look at the large farmers, but we know most of the productive capacity in Africa is from a small and medium-sized farming capacity. So we are having problems with that, and those are constant conversations that would help a lot if there were first loss provisions and the return hurdles were also, reflective of the ability of those farmers to sort of meet high returns, because it's just not possible. One, the skill set level is just not there. Two, when you come to the cultivars that are generally used across the continent, in various areas of the continent that we have had to start farming activities in West Africa, etc., we had to do our own studies for the cultivars over 4 years. Because they just didn't have the right cultivars for soy and maize. We worked with Monsanto, we worked with Louis Dreyfus. But for us as a fund, you only have a 5 or 6 year investment horizon. And if you have to return the funds in 5 or 6 years and you spend 5 years trying to figure the cultivars, then you sort of drive away the investment in those areas. because the cultivars themselves account more than 60% of the productive capacity of a particular crop. What we have also found very helpful are the technical assistance facility programs. In the first fund, we worked with IFAD. Those create a tremendous difference. With the smallholder farmers, we worked with almost 4,000 in Ethiopia. We worked with over 300 in Cameroon. But the outcomes for a lot of these farmers that we worked with that grant aid made a significant difference to the productivities and the organization of these farmers, so that they went to the market as a block. They were able to actually create a lot of productive capacities around themselves. Likewise, in the second fund, we also have a technical assistance facility funded by the FTB and BII, and to some extent DGGF. So these type of investments are always very, very helpful. But the issue of investment horizon, I think, is the biggest issue that we face in this market. One, the cultivars are not always appropriate, and a lot of these markets are not profitable enough for the large companies that actually parlay these seeds across the continent. Two, we also look in animal production. We always need superior genetics for the productive capacity. Most farmers, pig farmers, cattle farmers use local genetics that, again, are not as productive as the superior genetics you get in Europe. From some of our investments, again, it took us 3 or 4 years to create superior genetics, especially in pig production. When we started the investments, our productive capacity was 9 piglets per sow per year, but with the superior genetics, you sort of get about 26 piglets a year, and they get to a cell weight in 3 months instead of 6 months. So it's a tremendous difference in terms of productivity and the tons of food produced with the same size farm and the same sow population. But again, it took us 3 or 4 years to get through all the hurdles of the superior genetics and getting the governments to allow those changes and exchanges, etc. You can say the same thing about poultry, where the parent stock is all held up in Europe. And when we have our poultry in Burkina Faso, we can't even get the eggs in Burkina Faso. We have to wait for ships coming from Europe to bring those eggs that have the second generation that you start using, and you lose 6-9 months. So all of these issues that are around availability and ability to actually execute quickly work against the availability of funding within the sector, which is greatly needed. From our perspective, we decided to try to ameliorate the situation with the way we looked at some of the investments in our fund. We created an ag tech platform that is 50% in development. But what we are creating with this platform is a finance, input, and insurance platform that's accessible to small and medium farmers, as well as banks and insurance companies. And what we are trying to do is to remove the balance sheet lending to the farmers, to the productive capacity of the farmer. The project is going very well, and we think if it's successful, it will revolutionize the way banks and insurance companies lend to this sector of farmers, which is the biggest productive group for the African continent. We have also looked at fintechs for logistics for delivery of food in rural areas. So we have taken over a company that did delivery of a lot of items outside food, but when we invested, we insisted that 70% of those deliveries now have to be maize, seeds, fertilizers, and food, etc. So again, that fintech is 5-6 years in the making, but it's making a lot of inroads. We have also taken over a trade finance company that traded in non-food commodities, and again, now demand that 70% of the trade has to be food related. Because we've just seen these gaps in the way that everything within the food value chain outside of tertiary and secondary is very, very difficult to acquire funding. So the biggest thing for us is, look, can we have first loss? Can we have a lot more of these hurdle rates reduced? Even for us as private equity funds, when we receive funds from the DFIs, from the EIBs, who are our supporters, and BII, the hurdle rates required of us are not different from the hurdle rates required from other commercial private equity funds. But we are also expected then to work in this agricultural sector where the turnaround time for successful projects is 5 or 6 years. So those are conversations we continue to have with the major lenders to see if we can have a breakthrough around that.
Thank you so much. So the perspective actually that you're sketching is kind of a loop that feeds itself back. Right, there is the horizon, 5 to 6 years is too small. The small farms are not productive enough. They cannot invest in actually, for example, improve genetics because they will take too long to actually reproduce the profit, which is then needed to actually guarantee these kind of loans. So it's catch-22. We stay within the same remit, whereas there are possibilities to break out of this, but that will require a longer-term horizon in financing. And also, I think you mentioned the fact that there's a kind of a need for an aggregator and an integrator, because these smallholder farmers need small grants, and the large financial institutions can only give large grants. So what is that layer in between? What is that interface between those many smallholder farmers and those institutional investors, and how can we bring that together? Felipe, of course, I'll turn to you first. On that horizon, and then I'd love to hear from all of the speakers, on that short-term horizon versus a bit longer-term needs, right? It's not 20 years that he's talking about, but it's the time for these investments to be repaid with the low margins that these farmers have. What kind of solutions could you think of to overcome this burden and get into this positive spiral, actually, of being able to invest in these farmers that can then, with the right techniques and with the right capacity building and assistance, actually create that improvement in the structural situation? To you.
Now? Yeah.
And keep it stable and close to your mouth. That's perfect. Putting it on your lap works.
No, I mean, there are a number of solutions. I think they have been mentioned. Hello?
Yes, it's excellent.
They have been mentioned, many of them already, but I would highlight, first of all, these solutions, or most of the solutions that work best, need to be embedded in a country development strategy of the agricultural sector. And as such, that both the public sector and the private sector join forces together with financial institutions like ours in order to make projects happen in a very impactful way. I mean, I can mention, for example, the example of the Lower Osutu smallholder finance facility project that we financed in Swaziland, where in principle there have been a number of MDBs like EIB, like AFDB, like Badea and others working together with the country institutions, doing capacity building, having then the own institution in the country implementing the project with all the support, of course, but themselves in the most impactful way and adapted. This is very important because all the countries have their singularity, and it's very important that there is this transfer of capacity, knowledge, support in a way that this sticks, that it stays there. So, what other enabling processes would I see? There has been a bit of a discussion around insurance policies. There again, I mean, in areas of the world where you see that agricultural finance works well, normally you have strong agricultural insurance schemes. It is linked. So, in order to increase the flow of funds, to increase the trust of different actors, not only the banks, but also the commercial actors, the input providers, etc. in the sector, you need an adequate insurance that if you have a crop failure for whatever climate reason, you have an insurance that guarantees the livelihood of the farmer, but also then the cash flows for the institutions. And the best insurance schemes normally always work in a hybrid way, so public investment together with private flow of funds from the farmers, from insurance companies, etc. Then I mentioned, of course, the financing of the sector. So typically it is very difficult for an institution like ours to reach out to the farmers on the ground. So there is importance of collaborating with the private banking sector, building this capacity to reach out to them. And today, this morning, in a conference that I had participated, there was some person who founded an SME who was asking about the rising interest rates. Of course, the interest rates, particularly in a risk-perceived sector like this, they are quite high in many countries. So, and there's where I see the role of these blended instruments of first loss pieces, co-financing, where you use public money in order to enable the financing at acceptable lending rates, and where you mix this public money by the intervention of public institutions like ours, for example, you can see this happen. And then, of course, in the more longer term, we are talking about enabling rural infrastructure. So we are talking from irrigation that has been mentioned already, smart irrigation schemes that incorporates the farmers into the design. So because it is of no use that somebody comes, makes a big investment in primary, secondary infrastructure, and then the farmers don't have the means to come with and a part of this self-empowerment, we also have to say that it is important that the farmers then take also ownership of the investments, and then we come into the sustainability aspects of tariff payment in order to maintain this infrastructure in the long term. But last and not least, it is also important to help building the market, to do value chain investments, and there, I mean, from EIB, we have been active in Europe and out of Europe in financing seed companies. For example, it was mentioned before in their research program for Europe, for out of Europe, to develop adapted seeds in order to take this burden from the farmers. No, why should the farmers do their own seed, their own breed development when this is typically a thing of specialized institutions, public, private, that have to do that, no? And building market, building access to market systems, supporting also the companies that do this aggregation. This is part of the necessary steps to empower the local sectors and the farmers to make their own livelihood, and the countries to support them, of course.
Absolutely, and I like the way how you say, well, there's different angles to actually reducing the cost for farmers and reducing the cost of the loans. And indeed, in that sense, insurance can play a role in actually de-risking. And so this blending of these packages is absolutely vital to bring it to a cost that's also repayable, also when you are a smallholder farmer. On the point of, let's say, that genetic work, of course, when we were just talking about more, let's say, self-sufficiency of the countries, we do have to avoid, of course, them becoming dependent then on outside parties again. So there is a bit of a tension there. I'm not saying that it should never play a role, but there is this question of dependence and independence. I wish I see from your body language you also feel that the balance should be gotten right there. So let me first go over to Martin. When you look at this question that was just posed on the table, the need for the investment, the need for that structuring of those packages, the need to get to the smallholder farmers. What's your perspective on this?
Well, I mean, firstly, I can only agree what you have said. It is only if we are blending different instruments that things really come together. And insurance plays an enormous role, because we will see more and more shocks, and we cannot risk all of the development in the way going forward. I think a major point can be and should be that carbon credits are being made available for smallholder farmers, so that there is also a long-term perspective in which farmers would create an additional income stream. This is decisive, and for many of our clients, if I may say, these are farming ladies where the plot of land is even smaller than this pavilion. So it needs the infrastructure to bring it down on the ground. It needs an understanding also from donor side that we need to come together with different angles for a solution that really makes sense. Often we do have humanitarian funding coming from one source, development funding coming from a different source, climate money coming from a different source, but it comes back to all the same integrated life reality. And we need to build that. And I think a very important point here is not only the climate dividend of it, but an overarching peace and stability dividend, which is decisive for countries to invest. What it needs is a partnership in which all the different sectors, banking sector, international organizations come together with a strong will of leadership and taking responsibility by governments on all levels, not only the central government, but in particular provincial governments down to the community, so that we find on every level the answer which is adequate for the situation we are facing. But it all starts with the stabilization, it all starts with getting people out of the immediate crisis and then building a system that is backstopped also by simple insurances to ensure that a relatively modest shock is not causing all of development to backslide over years.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that increases the resilience of basically the whole economy and all society to avoid that indeed even small shocks can have disproportionate effects, making restoration even more difficult of livelihoods. Casey, IFAD was just mentioned as one having a number of projects that were actually successful also in relation to the financing questions that were just being raised. So could you elaborate a bit on that? So what is IFAD's approach in this, and how are you finding, how could we scale those kind of successful approaches?
IFAD has a decades-old program which we call the 4 Ps. So you hear a lot about public-private partnerships. Everyone's heard about that. What we've been doing for decades is a model we've done across the world that works. It's called the public-private producer partnerships. So the extra P is the producer. You might say, who's the producer? It's the smallholder farmers. So we put the smallholder farmers at the center of the partnership and then work with the public, meaning the government on the national and regional level, the private sector, often as off-takers, but also bringing in technical assistance, climate-smart seeds, drip water irrigation, climate-resistant agricultural practices, organic fertilizer, etc., and then the producer. So you have the government, the private sector, and the smallholder farmers. And the smallholder farmers, that 3rd P, are the center. It is their voice, these people who are in the last mile, building rural resilient communities who help guide and shape the projects that work for their communities and their country. And then we bring in the private sector and the public sector. So let me give you a quick example because it might seem a bit amorphous speaking about the 4 Ps. So in a recent project, I was in Nigeria about 10 days ago and really shocked by the devastating flooding we've seen across the country with almost 1/3 of the country underwater. This also shows the importance of investment in climate adaptation, which is something that IFAD includes in financing all of our projects. We are really an assembler of development finance. So we have finance and we bring other development institutions together around the 4P model. So in 2014 in Nigeria, Olam Nigeria, who you might know is a big rice producer, built a beautiful, a gorgeous brand new mill, state of the art. What was the problem? Not enough smallholder farmers were bringing rice to be milled. So it was going unused. So we worked with Olam to put together a public-private partnership whereby we put together cooperatives of small rice. Should I stop? Okay. Of small rice farmers, so that they could also have more power in the collective because they're much bigger. And they did what's called an offtake agreement, where the cooperatives sign a legal agreement with the private sector, with Olam, saying, we will buy all the rice that you produce. And this is a huge thing for smallholder farmers because they have a market. We have to bring markets and agri-businesses to smallholder farms to make them sustainable and successful. IFAD then worked with the government to have appropriate agricultural policies as well as tax and other incentives in these areas. And together, we brought private small-scale producers together, worked on not only agricultural techniques for technical assistance, but also financial techniques. How do you build a balance sheet? How do you show that you have a credit history? What are the best types of fertilizers to buy? At what prices? Can you offer insurance? It's an interesting comment. I think today we've heard a lot about the supply side of insurance, but we haven't talked about the demand side of insurance. Do smallholder farmers buy crop insurance? Generally, no. In Nigeria, after the flooding, that changed because those who had bought the crop insurance were repaid. And the other smallholder farmers started to see this, and we've seen the demand now for crop insurance go up among the farmers. So it's about the supply, yes, having that financial instrument available, but also about the demand. And that's why the power of having smallholder farmers at the center of the 4P structure really works. Fast forward 8 years, the production capacity of that mill built by Olam that was unused in 2014 has increased by 10 times. Most of the smallholder farmers in the program have more than doubled their income. And the value of the crops that they're creating, because we're working along the value chain, is actually much higher because they've gotten a lot of technical advice and assistance so that the value of the rice itself is a much higher caliber. And finally, we've put together pricing committees, which are dominated by smallholder farmers, but include some government as well as private sector, so that the farmers are comfortable and trust that the price that is given is a valuable, appropriate price, cutting out the middlemen, so that the farmers have a higher price, and Olam also has, or the private sector also has, a reasonable price. So this is just an overview of a model I think works extremely well, the 4P model that IFAD's been using for years, and that we really try to serve as an assembler of development finance, bringing others together to support in a holistic way the growth.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's such a telling example of how you can actually turn that spiral around. Like an unused mill is like a symbol of how it doesn't work if you don't include actually the farmer. So what does the farmer need? He actually needed the assurance that his crop would actually be sold, and then he will invest. So thank you so much. Such a telling example. Adam, if you hear all this from your perspective, what would you like to add about increasing resilience as we go towards our final comments?
Great, thank you. Wow, I'm super impressed by all the activity that we've heard today. I think where I can come in a little bit is gives a humanitarian perspective. And humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross, our mission is central to save lives. And I think similar to Katie's organization, the Red Cross puts the communities at the center of our interventions. To do this, obviously, we need additional financing. And with all the increasing demand and inflation and macroeconomic and complexities in the world today, there's really not enough on the grant side. And so we look for opportunities around leverage, similar to how banks might embrace fractional banking. And so to move this forward, we also think about like systems level engagement, value chain engagement, ways to look across the entire spectrum so that we can engage solutions such as with that are based in technology or financial. And so back in 2020, the Danish Red Cross set up an insurance company called Do Not Re in Guernsey. And it was the first time a humanitarian organization had an insurance company of its own, which was captive, but also it was ESG compliant, which meant we could go after that green investment market. This insurance company called Do Not Re sits on blockchain, which dramatically lowers the entry point. So for example, if we want to do a bond, an insurance product, it might cost thousands of dollars rather than millions of dollars. And this entry point is really important because lots of countries and organizations in the world don't have millions of dollars to spend on structure or admin fees. And so in 2021, we issued this catastrophe bond called the Volcano Cat Bond, and it covered 7 different countries. And this is really important from a game-changing perspective because it allowed us to now have our own facility to then go out and work in different areas. And the intention was to blend this insurance product, not to be an insurance product in its own, but to be part of other solutions. And in this case, when we talk about climate adaptation mechanisms, for example, nature-based solutions, and how can we use insurance plus other types of adaptation and community engagement to isolate and to build resilience in communities that are faced with disasters and food insecurity. And so this year we partnered up with Replexus out of the UK and Base Carbon, and I think my colleague Phil Hardwick is actually in the audience today,
Yes,
to actually set up something called the Asia Pacific Protection, Restoration, and Resilience Facility. And what this is a nature-based solution where essentially we've created a trust fund. That trust fund has 2 legs. The first leg is linked to an insurance product, and this is a typhoon insurance, and it's a catastrophe bond, which is trigger-based. And we'll issue that cat bond from Do Not Re. And then the other leg is actually funding that goes directly to communities to replant and reforest and restore mangrove forests along the coast of the Philippines. And this protects against surge, it helps with watershed management, it creates jobs and livelihoods. It has a huge number of different touch points on the resilience front. But also each time we go ahead and we plant a tree, there's a carbon credit that's generated over the course of several years. And so together with Base Carbon, who has helped us on the project finance side, we're able to collect these carbon credits and then a portion of them going back into the trust fund that allows the system to be circular. So it's sustainable over multiple years. And if there is a tsunami or a typhoon that hits the Philippines, then that insurance cover triggers and it allows for more funding to go into the ground. That's a really important type of solution that we're really excited about. I'll give you one more because I know we're short on time. We're also looking at multi-hazard financing that looks at cascade effects. So if there's heavy rain, you have mudslides, how does that impact people's farms, poultry, waterborne diseases? There's things we're doing around forecast-based financing, forecast-based action, which is kind of this using technology as trigger-based financing to see when an event happens to be able to put money into the ground quickly so you can protect the communities before a large event happens. But more interestingly, in some ways, is a product that we're doing called the Pay It Forward Fund, which is essentially allowing us to go to impact investors. And we tell them, look, these communities, say in Somalia, need 5 years of financing to build their capacity so that they have operational capacity to put resilience in place and to do the type of interventions we spoke about today. And then we also created a catastrophe bond based on IPC 4 and 5 triggers that will allow us to then repay the investors. So in the first step, you have investors coming in to pay for the initial operational flow. And then if there is a significant crisis, the insurance product triggers and that actually partially repays the investors back. Because really there's no way to get investor money if you're doing kind of operational flow, which is really one of the most important kind of hurdles that a lot of these communities face. Anyway, I'll leave it there because I know we're short on time.
No, but these are such illustrative examples of how smart financial engineering can help us bridge that gap between where we currently are and what is needed. Because public funds or grants, also from philanthropy, or first loss amounts, they will always be limited. So we need to be smart in our financial engineering and linking it to the carbon market, indeed making it circular. I work a lot on the circular economy in very different ways, but this is a whole innovative approach to the circular economy, which I think is an absolute inspiration. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Dennis, you've heard so much. A few final comments from you. If you hear all this, what would you prioritize? Because the challenges are so vast. And if you could name one thing that you'd like us to prioritize as a community focusing on this, what would that be?
I'll prioritize two things: continued support of programs like the TAF program through IFAD. We also had, a $20 million facility in Sierra Leone, which had no throughput until, we went through, an IFAD sort of process with the smallholder farmers, and capacity usage, increased all the way to over 40% from under 10%. But the biggest thing I would emphasize on the funding side, just to underscore what everybody else has said, is the availability of insurance, because the insurance unlocks the bank's ability or willingness to lend, so that you can start that process. So from our standpoint, with our AgTech platform, we are actually buying an insurance company. We want that insurance company to create bespoke insurance policies that are not available in the market, that are very specific to this demographic. And most of the larger financial institutions in South Africa have already indicated support for this. But we believe if we unlock that insurance product, the way that we are going to organize the funding that goes into these farmers, which is incremental funding, you get your funding for the seeds. Once the seeds are done, you have the technology to actually determine that the seeds are germinated. Then you get, the funding for the next round of fertilizers. Once the fertilizers are put in the ground, you can tell with the technology and the drones that the fertilizer is in the ground, and the insurance funds underwrites every process, and the bank opens up their purse incrementally all the way up to harvest time. We believe if we're able to successfully do this AgTech platform in South Africa, as we anticipate over the next year and a half, we should be able to roll it very successfully across the continent to ameliorate the funding situations for smallholder farmers greatly.
Thank you so much. And we'll be following it closely because it's a very inspiring example of how we can all together build a chain. I think we started this panel saying we will need all of the elements to come together. I think we've unpacked so many of those elements. We've actually discussed that we need technical solutions, and they're all there, right? And some of those actual technical solutions that we need have been there for centuries or even millennia. So the solutions are there, but we need more market solutions. We need to look at the market also, and restructuring, like guaranteed markets, like cooperatives. All of those market solutions will actually be part of the solution of creating that better resilience. We need financing solutions like hybrid insurance, like hybrid packages, including insurance. And there are even some beautiful examples of how even that insurance can be hybrid and can be smartly designed to make the most of the funding that we have available. And then we may even be able to link it to the climate financing and the carbon market. So I think bringing all of this together, I think for me personally was a very enriching debate. I want to thank all of the panelists, both online and here in the room. I particularly want to thank the governor for being here and sharing his stories and inspiring us to do ever more as much as we can. And now I'd like to hand over for the final concluding remarks to our very valued partner, the EIB. The Vice President had to leave to another engagement, so I'd like to invite you, Felipe, for some closing remarks. Over to you.
No? Okay. No, just very briefly, to closing, we have, I think it was a very interesting session. And thank you very much to all the participants for their points of view. If I may recall a bit, I think it was quite relevant to have the setting of the scene by the governor, who actually highlighted from a situation that is currently quite dramatic, but also immediately made the link to the solutions. And we have heard a lot about short-term, but also a lot about long-term solutions. And you mentioned a couple, but if I may summarize the solutions in 4 letters, you mentioned the 3 Ps. So the public, the private, and the producers. I would add to that the financial part. So it's important to have financial integration and have the financial sector working for the farming community, so that we can unwind the dependency of the farming sector from subsidy only, from emergency supply only, and have this working. And I think there is where our role as public financing institutions and as international aid institutions comes in very, very, very relevantly, with the aim of, as the VP said this morning, and with this I would like to close, is that of course in many parts of the world agriculture is part of the problem. There are lots of emissions due to agricultural expansion and others. Unfortunately, these impacts that are caused by this are caused in other parts of the world where the people have nothing to do with this, and it is the concept, I mean, of producing the issue in some parts of the world, and we have seen that this affects mainly people in other parts of the world. And I think what we discussed today, the key word is food security and adaptation are intrinsically linked, and I strongly believe that any investment, any sustainable investment in agriculture is by essence also adaptation, broadly speaking. Of course, if you apply very orthodox adaptation criteria, probably some people might challenge this, but it is broadly adaptation, because without investing in agricultural production and food security, you will have population suffering, and that is where in principle our role as public institution governments, but also with the support of institutions like ours, come in. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And if it doesn't work for the farmers, it will fail. I think that for me was also one headline that I take away from this very interesting debate. Thank you again to all of the speakers. A warm round of applause, and thank you also so much for being here with us today and also online. Thank you so much.